I still remember the exact sound the conference room made when my brother heard those words. It was 11:14 in the morning. 3rd floor. A building on Callaway Street that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. 8 of us around an oval table. My brother Daniel, his wife Renata, 2 of my aunts, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, my grandmother's oldest friend Patrice, a paralegal taking notes in the corner, and me, the attorney. A man named Gerald Holt, silver-haired, reading glasses, the unhurried manner of someone who had done this 1,000 times, adjusted the document in front of him and began. Daniel leaned back in his chair like a man who already knew the ending of the movie. He did know. He had been told. Or he believed he had been told. Exactly what that document said. Gerald Holt read, "To my grandson, Daniel Mercer, I leave the house at 22 Birchwood Lane. The investment accounts. The savings. All personal property therein." My cousin exhaled. One of my aunts nodded slowly. Daniel's wife reached across and squeezed his hand. I sat very still. My hands were folded in my lap. My bag was on the floor beside my chair. And inside that bag, inside a manila envelope with my name written on the front in my grandmother's handwriting, the same handwriting I had known since I was 4 years old, was a different document. One that Gerald Holt did not have a copy of. One that had been signed, notarized, and filed at the county recorder's office 16 months before my grandmother died. Before I tell you what happened when I placed that envelope on that table, please hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back, all the way back to Birchwood Lane. My name is Claire Mercer. I am 33 years old. I am a licensed clinical social worker in a mid-sized city in Ohio, and I have spent the last 10 years of my career helping families navigate the kind of situations that most people never expect to find themselves in. Inheritance disputes, estrangement, the slow, complicated grief of loving people who do not always love you back in the same way. I tell you that not because my job is important to this story, exactly, but because it explains something about how I learned to pay attention. To notice the things people do not say. To watch what a person's hands do when their face is doing something else. My grandmother Eleanor, everyone called her Ellie, raised me to pay attention. She did it quietly, the way she did most things. The house at 22 Birchwood Lane was not a large house. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a kitchen with pale green tile countertops she refused to replace because she said they reminded her of her mother's kitchen, and she was not going to sand that memory down just because it was unfashionable. The backyard had a garden she kept herself until she was 79. Tomatoes, zucchini, basil in a clay pot by the back door, and marigolds along the fence line every year because she believed marigolds kept the deer away. I grew up 2 miles from that house. My brother Daniel grew up in the same house I did. Same parents, same 2 Christmases every year. One at our house, one at Grandma's, always. But Daniel and I did not have the same relationship with Grandma Ellie. I want to be careful here, because this is not a story about a villain. My brother is not a villain. He is a man who was shaped by what was given to him, the same way I was shaped by what was given to me. We just received different things. Daniel was the firstborn, named after our grandfather, who died the year before I was born. He was tall and confident and good at things that were visible. School sports, business presentations, the kind of handshake that makes people feel like they've just met someone important. He had a way of entering a room that rearranged it slightly in his favor. I was quieter. I read. I became a social worker. I drove a 7-year-old Honda and found this perfectly acceptable. When our parents divorced, I was 12, Daniel was 17. Our father moved to Phoenix. Daniel followed him at 18 for college. He built a life out there. The sun, the deals, the expanding circle of people who returned his calls. I stayed in Ohio. And every Saturday morning for the next 14 years, I drove 2 miles down Maple Street and turned left onto Birchwood Lane. Not because anyone asked me to. Not because it was arranged or expected or listed on a family calendar somewhere. Because my grandmother made very good coffee and kept National Geographic magazines going back to 1989. And she was, for most of my adult life, the only person I knew who never made me feel like I was supposed to be something other than what I was. That Saturday routine began to mean something different when she turned 81 and her knees started failing her. I want to tell you what those Saturdays looked like in detail, because I think the details are the whole point. I think they explain a decision my grandmother made that no one else in my family saw coming. And I think if you understand the details, you'll understand why she made it. Every Saturday, I arrived around 9 in the morning. I brought groceries from Hanson's Market. The specific ones she liked, because she had opinions about brands that I had learned through a decade of paying attention. Whole milk, not 2%. Butter with a foil wrapper, not the kind in the plastic tub. A specific kind of crackers in a green box that the store occasionally ran out of, which meant I had learned to call ahead and ask them to hold a box. We would have coffee at the kitchen table, the one with the pale green tiles she refused to replace. And she would tell me something she had read or remembered, and I would tell her something from my week, and then I would do whatever needed doing. A load of laundry, a light bulb she couldn't reach. The slow, careful work of sorting her new prescription medications into the weekly pill organizer after her doctor changed 2 of her dosages and the new bottles confused the system she had been using for 3 years. After her first fall, she was alone in the kitchen, reaching for something on the second shelf. Her knee gave out, and she was on the floor for 21 minutes before she reached her phone. I started coming twice a week, Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings. She called me when she fell. Not Daniel, not my aunts, me. I was at her house in 9 minutes. I helped her up. Nothing was broken, but something had shifted. The way she moved through her own home changed. One hand on the counter, eyes on the floor. The slow recalibration of a woman who understood that her body had become something to negotiate with. Daniel called the following week and told her she should sell the house and move into an assisted living facility. She said, and I am quoting her directly, "I will leave this house when they carry me out of it." He said he was only being practical. She changed the subject to his children. He flew in twice that year, stayed 3 days each time, accepted her cooking, called her the toughest woman I know, flew back to Phoenix. I was there every Tuesday evening and every Saturday morning, and I did not think of myself as doing anything remarkable. I thought of myself as someone who lived nearby and had time, and whose grandmother needed help with her laundry, her pill organizer, and the grab bar I installed in her bathroom that February, which she leaned on every single morning for the rest of her life. The year my grandmother turned 83, 2 things happened that I did not immediately connect to each other. The first was Daniel's visits. He came more often that year. Not to help. The rhythm of what helping actually looked like, the Tuesdays and Saturdays, the grocery lists, and the pill organizers remained entirely mine. But he came to sit with her in the living room, and I noticed that the conversations had a different quality to them than they used to. More probing, more interested in specifics. "How is the house holding up, Grandma? What does your financial advisor say about the portfolio? Have you thought any more about what you want to do with everything?" She answered these questions the way she answered most questions. She found them slightly impertinent, briefly, pleasantly, and with a redirection towards something she found more interesting. But I noticed that when Daniel left, there were sometimes papers on the kitchen table that hadn't been there before. A folder from her financial institution. A manila envelope that she put away quickly when I came in on a Tuesday evening. Once, a legal pad with what looked like a list of assets written in Daniel's handwriting, with estimated values next to each one. I didn't say anything. I told myself he was being responsible. Estate planning. Someone had to think about these things. I kept watching. The second thing that happened that year was more difficult to categorize. On a Thursday afternoon in March, my grandmother called me. Not a Saturday, not a Tuesday. A Thursday, which was unusual. Her voice was her normal voice. Steady, deliberate, the voice of a woman who had decided to do something and was now doing it. She said she needed me to drive her to an appointment the following Saturday. She said it was downtown. I asked if she was all right. She said she was fine. She said she just needed a driver, and she trusted my driving. I picked her up at 8:30 that Saturday morning. We drove downtown. I pulled into the parking lot of a 2-story building on Callaway Street. The sign outside said Reese and Caldwell, attorneys at law. I offered to come in with her. She said, "I'd like to do this one alone, sweetheart." I sat in my car for an hour and 35 minutes. I listened to the radio. I watched people come and go from the building. I thought about nothing in particular, which is what I tend to do when I'm waiting for something I don't fully understand yet. She came out with a folder under her arm. Her chin was slightly raised. The expression she wore when she had made a decision she felt settled about. It was the same expression she had worn on the day she told my father, during their last significant argument at her kitchen table, that she thought he had made a series of choices that were beneath him. Calm. Final. Not unkind. On the drive home, she said, "I want you to know that I see you, Claire. I've always seen you. I just needed to make sure the paperwork agreed with me." I didn't ask what she meant. I understood enough to let the moment be what it was. We drove in silence for a while. The radio was playing something quiet. She looked out the window at the street she had lived on for 54 years. 6 weeks after that appointment, on a Tuesday evening in May, she handed me an envelope. My name is on the front. Her handwriting. The careful, looping cursive she had learned in 1954 and never abandoned. Sealed with a strip of tape she had pressed down twice, firmly, the way she did things she wanted to last. "Keep this somewhere safe," she said. "Somewhere no one else can get to it. Don't open it unless I'm gone and someone is trying to take something from you." I held the envelope. It was thin, 3 pages, maybe 4. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" she said. "I think so," I said. She patted my hand the way she had patted my hand since I was small. 2 pats, firm, the universal signal in our family that a conversation had reached its conclusion. "The deer always try," she said, looking out at her garden. "That's just what they do. But the marigolds work if you plant enough of them." I put the envelope in the fireproof lockbox in my hall closet that same night, and I did not open it for 16 months. That fall, her health began to change in the way that health sometimes changes in old age. Not dramatically, not with a single event, but steadily, quietly, like a tide going out so slowly you don't notice until the shoreline looks different. Her appetite decreased. She tired more easily. Her cardiologist added 2 new medications in October and told her, in the careful language doctors used for this conversation, that her heart was working harder than it should be and that they would manage it as best they could. Daniel flew in for that appointment. He sat in the examination room and asked the doctor good questions, squeezed his grandmother's shoulder on the way out, and told her she was tougher than all of us put together. He flew back to Phoenix the following morning. I rearranged my entire caseload and started coming to Birchwood Lane every day. Not every Tuesday and Saturday. Every day. I brought her meals when she didn't feel like cooking. I sat with her in the living room in the evenings, and we watched old films on the television. The one with the large screen, she said, was the only television she had ever owned that she could actually see properly. We talked about her life, her childhood, her marriage to my grandfather Harold, the things she was proud of, and the things she would have done differently. We made the soup she had been making since 1968 from a recipe she carried only in her memory, and she taught me the proportions while she still could. In February, she told me she was not afraid. I said, "Of dying?" She said, "Of anything." I made sure of it. She passed on a Wednesday evening in late March, in her own bed, in her own house on Birchwood Lane, which is exactly what she had wanted. Her breathing slowed through the afternoon, and then it stopped, and the room was very quiet. I was with her. Daniel landed at the airport 2 hours and 14 minutes later. Before I tell you what happened at that will reading, I want to ask you something first. Have you ever known something that nobody else in the room knew? Sat with a truth so complete and so quiet inside you that you were almost afraid to breathe too hard? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now, because this story is about to change direction entirely. The 2 weeks between my grandmother's death and the will reading were not the kind of grief that gets to simply be grief. There were arrangements, phone calls, the particular choreography of a family that has not been in the same place at the same time in several years. The funeral was on a Tuesday. Gray sky. The garden at Birchwood Lane was just beginning to come up from the ground. The first green of the season, cautious and new. The service was at the church she had attended for 61 years, and the pews were filled in the way that only happens for people who spent their whole lives being genuinely good to other people. I wore a dusty blue dress. She had told me years ago that blue was what she wanted people to wear when she was gone. She said black was for forgetting and blue was for remembering, and she wanted to be remembered. Daniel gave a eulogy. It was good. He spoke about her cooking, her stubbornness, and her sharp sense of humor. He cried at the right moments. He was not performing. I want to be clear about that. He loved her. He just loved her the way people sometimes love things they take for granted, which is to say genuinely but not particularly attentively. 3 days after the funeral, Daniel pulled me aside at the reception that had been organized at our aunt's house. His voice had the particular gentleness he used when he wanted something to proceed smoothly. He said, "I want you to know I'm going to take care of everything." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "The house, the accounts." She made her wishes clear to me. "I just want to make sure you know that I'm going to look after you in all of this. There'll be something for you." "Something," I said. He nodded. "Like your share. We'll figure it out, the way families do." He squeezed my arm and walked away to accept more condolences. I stood with my coffee going cold and thought about an envelope in a fireproof lockbox in my hall closet. 2 days after that, I drove to Reese and Caldwell, attorneys at law, alone. I sat across from a woman named Patricia Reese, silver-haired, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the careful, unhurried manner of someone who chose her words precisely because she understood their weight. She told me what I had begun to prepare myself to hear. My grandmother had come to their office 16 months earlier. She had been in full possession of her faculties. 2 independent witnesses and a notary of record could confirm that, along with clinical notes from her physician documenting her cognitive clarity at a checkup the week prior. She had established a revocable living trust, which became irrevocable at the moment of her death. The trust held the house at 22 Birchwood Lane. It held an investment portfolio, currently valued at $461,000. It held a savings account with a balance of $78,000. The sole named beneficiary of that trust was me. The will, the document Gerald Holt would read in 11 days, was a document my grandmother had signed 8 years earlier, before her knees gave out, before the falls, before I was coming every Tuesday and every Saturday, and then every day. The will left nearly everything to Daniel. But Patricia Reese explained, in her steady, careful voice, that the trust superseded the will entirely. Assets held inside a trust do not pass through a will. They transfer directly to the trust beneficiary at the moment of the grantor's death. The will had no authority over them because they were no longer in my grandmother's estate. They had been transferred into the trust, recorded at the county recorder's office, and legally held in my name for 16 months. The room was very quiet. I looked at my hands. Patricia Reese said, "Your grandmother was very specific about her intentions. She asked us to make this document as bulletproof as possible." That was the word she used. Bulletproof. She told us, and I am reading directly from my notes. "I know how my family works. I need the paperwork to be louder than the people." I drove home. I sat in my car in my driveway for a long time, long enough for the light to shift. Then I went inside and opened the envelope she had given me 16 months earlier. Inside was a copy of the trust document, the same one on file at the county recorder's office, and a note. 1 page. Her handwriting, the careful looping cursive she had learned in 1954. The ink was dark blue. It said, "You showed up, Claire. Every Tuesday. Every Saturday. Every day at the end, when it was hard, and you came anyway and never once made me feel like a burden. That's not a small thing. That's everything. I couldn't stop them from being who they are. But I could make sure you have ground to stand on. Take care of the marigolds. All my love always, Grandma Ellie." I read that note 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. I have kept it in the top drawer of the desk by the kitchen window ever since. The following morning, I called Patricia Reese. I told her I would be attending the will reading. I told her I would not say anything during it. I asked her what I should bring. She said, "Just the envelope. Arrive on time. Let them finish. I'll be 1 floor up if you need me. And if you've stayed with me this far, thank you. I need you to know that. Because this next part is the part I have needed to tell for a long time. Let me tell you exactly what happened in that conference room. Now let me tell you what happened at 22 Birchwood Lane. No, let me take you to that 3rd floor conference room on Callaway Street. We arrived at 10:50. The room was arranged with a long oval table, 8 leather chairs, and a credenza along one wall with a coffee service that nobody touched. Gerald Holt was already seated at the head of the table with his folder in front of him. A paralegal sat in the corner with a legal pad. Daniel arrived 2 minutes later with Renata. He was wearing a dark blazer. No tie. The effortless confidence of a man who had already mentally allocated the square footage of a house that was not yet legally his. He nodded at me when he came in. I nodded back. His wife gave me the careful smile people give when they are trying to be warmer than they feel. My aunts arrived together. Aunt Miriam and Aunt Faye, my mother's older sisters, who had been closer to Grandma than my father's side ever was. They sat on the same side of the table, the way they always did at family events, shoulders nearly touching. My cousin Marcus came in last, a little flushed, apologizing for a parking situation. He was the cousin I had been closest to as a child, before geography and years and the general drift of adult lives pulled us into separate orbits. He sat across from me, and we exchanged a small nod. And then Patrice Holloway. 81 years old, my grandmother's best friend for 43 years, who had been asked by my grandmother personally to attend this reading, for reasons that would become clear, sat down in the chair next to mine and took my hand without saying a word. Her hand was dry and warm, and she held mine firmly, the way women who have been through things hold on to each other. Gerald Holt adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat. He began. "We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Eleanor June Mercer, executed on the 14th of April, 8 years prior to her passing, and not amended to the knowledge of this office." Daniel's posture settled almost imperceptibly, a loosening. A man finds his footing on the ground he has already decided is solid. Gerald Holt read through the standard opening language, the declaration of sound mind, the formal acknowledgement of intention. Most people in the room were only half listening, waiting for the numbers, the way people always wait at these readings. Then the specific bequests. A donation to the church she had attended for 61 years. Her jewelry was divided among her sister's surviving daughters. A sum of $4,000 to Patrice Holloway for 43 years of true friendship and for being the one person who always told me the truth even when I didn't ask. Patrice's hand tightened on mine for just a moment. Then Gerald Holt's voice shifted slightly, the way voices shift when they arrive at the most significant item on the page. "To my grandson, Daniel Mercer, I leave the property at 22 Birchwood Lane and all personal property therein. I leave the full balance of my savings account at First Federal, currently holding $78,000. I leave my investment portfolio managed through Crawford Financial, currently valued at approximately $460,000. I leave Daniel the responsibility of ensuring this family remains a family, which I trust he will understand." My Aunt Miriam exhaled softly. My Aunt Faye nodded once, slowly. Renata reached over and took Daniel's hand for the second time that morning. Daniel did not smile. He was too practiced for that. But there was a change in him, a settling, a satisfaction that moved through his body the way warmth moves through a room when the heat finally comes on. Gerald Holt continued. To my granddaughter, Claire Mercer, I leave my collection of National Geographic magazines dating to 1989. I leave the recipe box in the kitchen drawer, third from the left, along with the knowledge of how to use everything inside it. I leave her my wish that she continues to show up for the people who need her, as she has done her entire life. My Aunt Miriam looked at me from across the table. Not unkindly. More carefully, the way you look at someone you're trying to read. I was sitting very still. My hands were in my lap. Patrice's hand was still on mine. My bag was on the floor beside my chair. Inside that bag was the manila envelope. My grandmother's handwriting on the front. Her careful, looping, 1954 cursive. Gerald Holt finished reading. He set the document down. He looked around the table and asked, in his practiced way, whether there were any questions. Daniel looked at me. His expression was calibrated to something that was meant to look like generosity. He said, quietly, across the table, "We'll take care of you, Claire. I meant what I said." The room was quiet. I looked at him for a moment. Then I reached into my bag. I removed the manila envelope. I placed it on the table in front of Gerald Holt. The room changed. Not loudly. There was no gasp, no dramatic shift. But something happened to the air in that room, the way air changes just before the weather. This is a copy of a document filed at the county recorder's office 16 months ago, I said. I think you should read it. Gerald Holt looked at the envelope. He looked at my name on the front in my grandmother's handwriting. He looked at me. Then he opened it. He read the first page in silence. Then the second. His expression did not change, but something behind it did. The quiet recalibration of a professional who has just received information that alters the entire frame of what he thought he was doing this morning. Daniel sat up straighter. "What is that?" he said. Gerald Holt set the document down. He folded his hands on the table. He spoke in the measured, deliberate tone of a man choosing every word with the full understanding that this sentence would be repeated and remembered. This is a copy of a revocable living trust established by Eleanor Mercer 16 months prior to her death. Upon her passing, the trust became irrevocable. The assets held within the trust. Specifically, the property at 22 Birchwood Lane, the investment portfolio through Crawford Financial, and the savings account at First Federal, passed directly to the named beneficiary at the moment of death. He paused. These assets were not part of Eleanor Mercer's estate at the time of her passing. They were held in trust, recorded at the county recorder's office, and transferred outside of the probate process. The will I have just read does not govern them. The room was silent for what felt like a very long time. Daniel said, "What does that mean?" Gerald Holt said, "It means the will is not the controlling document for these assets." Daniel said, "Then what is?" Gerald Holt placed one hand on the trust document on the table in front of him. "This is," he said. What came next was not a scene from a movie. There was no shouting. No one overturned anything. No one said something they could never take back, at least not in that room, not in that moment. What happened was quieter than any of that, and in some ways much harder to sit with. Daniel's face moved through several things in rapid succession. Confusion first. Genuine confusion. The kind that comes from information that simply does not fit the model you have been operating from. Then something that looked like disbelief. Then a stillness I recognized from our childhood, from the specific moments when Daniel encountered something he hadn't planned for and was deciding very carefully how to respond. He turned to me. "Did you know about this?" "I knew what Grandma gave me," I said. "I didn't open it until after she passed." He looked at his wife. She looked at the table. My Aunt Miriam said, slowly, In the voice of a woman absorbing something large, Eleanor set up a trust. Gerald Holt confirmed gently that he would need time to review the document in full. He recommended that all parties consult with independent legal counsel before taking any further steps. He said this in the calm way of a man who has watched this kind of moment happen before and knows that his job now is to be very clear and very neutral. Patrice Holloway, beside me, had not said a word since Gerald Holt began reading, but she had not let go of my hand. The meeting dissolved rather than ended. People gathered their things. My aunt whispered something to my cousin Marcus. Daniel sat in his chair for a moment longer than everyone else, staring at the middle distance. In the parking lot, the sky had cleared into something almost blue. Cars moved past on the street below. Daniel caught up with me near my car. Renata had gone ahead. He stopped in front of me. His hands were in his jacket pockets. He looked older than he had looked inside. "You had that envelope in your bag the entire time," he said. "Yes. You sat there. You let Holt read the whole will. And you said nothing." "I waited until he was finished," I said. "That seemed like the right thing to do." He was quiet for a moment. "Did she tell you why?" he said. "Why did she do it this way?" I thought about the note in my bag, the dark blue ink, the careful cursive. "You showed up, Claire. Every Tuesday, every Saturday, every day at the end." "Yes," I said. "She did." He nodded once. A tight, small nod. Then he walked to his car. I stood in that parking lot for a while, long enough that a cloud moved past and the light changed on the pavement. At the entrance to the building, there were planters with late-season marigolds in them, deep orange, the same color she had planted along her fence every April. I don't know if I noticed them on purpose. Daniel hired an attorney 11 days later. He contested the trust on the grounds of undue influence. The argument being that I had somehow manipulated an elderly woman into altering her estate plan in my favor. Patricia Reese had prepared for this. The trust had been executed with 2 independent witnesses, both of whom provided affidavits. My grandmother's physician documented her cognitive clarity in a formal clinical note taken during a visit the week before the signing. Patricia Reese's office had detailed notes from the meeting itself, taken with my grandmother's knowledge, including her stated reasoning in her own words. Those words, as Patricia Reese read them to me over the phone, were, "I want to leave the estate to my granddaughter Claire because she is the one who has understood that this house is not an asset. It is a home, and homes should go to the people who treat them that way." The contest was withdrawn after 4 months. Legal fees cost Daniel approximately $22,000. My aunts responded differently from each other, the way siblings always do when a family is forced to take a position. Aunt Miriam called me 3 weeks after the reading and said she thought Grandma had done what made sense, given what she knew about her grandchildren and how they had spent the last several years. She said this carefully, fairly, without editorializing. I appreciated it. Aunt Faye sent an email. I read it once, and then I deleted it. Marcus texted me on a Sunday afternoon. "I always thought you were the one who actually cared about her. Not about what she had. About her." I think she saw that. I think she made sure it counted. I saved that text. Daniel and I did not speak for 6 months. The house was transferred to me 4 months after the will reading, once the legal contest was formally dropped. The investment portfolio transferred the same week, $461,000, which had grown by an additional $11,000 during the months of legal proceedings. The savings account, $78,000, followed 2 weeks later. Total value of the estate held in trust, $550,000. The amount my brother had told me I would receive. My share, as he called it, the something he would make sure I got. He had mentioned $50,000. I know this because he mentioned it to Marcus, who mentioned it to me, later, when enough time had passed that Marcus felt he could say it. $50,000 out of $550,000. My grandmother had already made sure I received everything. She had done it 16 months before she died, quietly, in an attorney's office on Calloway Street, with 2 witnesses and a notary and her chin slightly raised. If someone in your life has ever done something to protect you, quietly, without announcing it, before you even knew you needed protection, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. The first time Daniel called me after those 6 months of silence, it was a Sunday evening in November. I was at Birchwood Lane, his house in the will, my house in reality. I was sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the last of the garden settle into the ground for winter. His voice was different. Not soft exactly, but without the performance of certainty that had always been present in it before. He sounded like a man who had spent 6 months sitting with something uncomfortable and had decided it was time to speak. He said, "I've been thinking about what she did. I'm not sure I fully accept it, but I think I understand it." I said, "I know it wasn't what you expected." He said, "Was it what you expected?" I thought about sitting in a car outside an attorney's office for an hour and 35 minutes while my grandmother signed documents that would outlast her. I thought about a fireproof lockbox. I thought about 16 months of not opening an envelope. "No," I said. "It wasn't." He was quiet for a moment. "She loved you differently," he said. "Yes," I said. Another pause. "I'm taking the boys to the botanical garden next spring," he said. "The one she used to take us to. I thought you might want to come." "I think she'd like that," I said. He said he had to go. He said he would call again. He has. I live at 22 Birchwood Lane now. I moved in 7 months after my grandmother passed. I repainted 2 of the bedrooms. I replaced the bathroom fixtures. I put a new porch light up out back, the kind she always said she wanted but never got around to ordering. I kept the green tile countertops in the kitchen. She was right. They are warmer than anything I would have chosen for myself. The garden is mine to tend now. I have made mistakes. Last spring, the marigolds along the south fence came up sparse, and the deer got into the tomatoes before I noticed. But I am learning the way she taught me to learn things, which is by showing up and paying attention until the knowledge becomes a habit. In the top drawer of the desk by the kitchen window, I keep 2 things: her recipe box, which I open every week, and her note. "You showed up, Claire. Every Tuesday. Every Saturday. Every day at the end, when it was hard, and you came anyway, and never once made me feel like a burden. That's not a small thing. That's everything." I have thought about that note a great deal. I used to wonder, sometimes, whether I felt anything like resentment toward the years of being quietly overlooked, toward the Christmases where Daniel's accomplishments were listed while mine were politely passed over, toward the decade and a half of Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings that seemed, from the outside, like they cost me something. I don't feel any resentment. I want to be very clear about that. Because it turned out those years were not the cost of something. They were the thing itself. The soup recipe. The National Geographic. The Saturday mornings when almost nothing was said, and somehow everything was said. The way she patted my hand twice, firmly, when a conversation had reached its conclusion. The marigolds. The green tiles. The grab bar I installed in her bathroom in February, which she used every morning for 3 more years. That was my inheritance. It just also happened to come with a house. My grandmother could not make Daniel show up. She could not reach into the past and redistribute attention that had already been spent. She could not fix the particular uneven mathematics of how love moves through families. But she could make sure that the years I had spent treating her home as a home, and not as an asset, were recorded somewhere permanent. In a language that could not be overruled, softened, or negotiated down at a kitchen table. Some love is spoken. Some love is notarized. And sometimes the people who protect you most completely are the ones who do it so quietly, you don't understand what they were doing until you find the envelope. If this story meant something to you today, if it gave you something, hope or recognition, or just the feeling of being a little less alone in your own story, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. That's how stories like this find the people they're meant for. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more. Check the description for others. I'll see you in the next one.